Let's see. We'll wait a few minutes before we get started. Welcome, everyone. For those of you that are joining in now live to our webinar, we'll start in a few minutes. We're already here with Alexandra Bennett, who's joining us from L'Oreal.
Hello.
Good morning.
You gave me my formal title there. You went full Alexandra, not Alex.
Yeah, I will go with Alex after this, but the
Okay.
full introduction will do it the proper way, Alexandra.
Fair enough.
Yeah, you want me to get, okay. Let's get started. Very exciting. So thank you all for being here. This is our fourth webinar. So Pera is hosting a kind of series of webinars to basically educate and strengthen the talent industry. We like to bring beautiful experts to the table that bring their experiences and their ideas. It's very interactive, so please join us in the Q&A sessions. You're able to actually join us by just clicking the Q&A and prompt your questions. Today, we're specifically very, very happy to bring the success story of one of our first clients, actually, as Pera, with L'Oreal UK, a company that is truly committed, at least how I got to know them, to transform the recruitment and talent management experience, not only for candidates, which is, of course, number one, but also internally in the company. So across all these years, we have witnessed so much progress, and I'm extremely proud that we are part of their story. Of course, a very, very warm welcome to our expert of today, Alex Bennett, who I got to know for a while now and witness to do amazing work that she's been doing in the early careers area. So a very short introduction. She has over 13 years of experience in the field of HR. She's a true expert and change maker, in my opinion, in her field. Her expertise lies in the field of early careers. She's been focused on recruitment, developing, and even retaining top talent with a very clear focus on diversity and inclusion. I think L'Oreal was one of the first ones to really make that leap forward and put emphasis on that. In her current role, Alex oversees the Early Careers program and employer branding for L'Oreal UK and Ireland, where she leads a team of professionals dedicated to identify and develop top talent across the organization. Alex, welcome.
Thank you very much. I feel so flattered already.
Well, we'll dive into the steps and the steps later and your true story. Before we get there, and maybe for those of you that are less familiar with Pera, so we started this company 7 years ago with our mission to identify true potential in people beyond that piece of paper, that resume, because we know that blind spots, when we look and identify and talk to people, exist in all of us. So we developed a digital structured interview that identifies competencies driving post-hiring success, because we believe that even the change makers of the future literally might look differently than you're used to. Well, that's being said, we'll dive into, of course, the story of L'Oreal. And Alex, of course, in a session like this, where we like to talk about data, it's data and people, right? You've been through this huge number of young talents that have a true interest in joining L'Oreal. I think last year it was over 12,000 applicants, and this year I think you already hit the 18,000. So it's only increasing over time. While you have to kind of boil it down to 243 if you look at the open positions that you're having. How on earth did you design this optimal recruitment process to start with?
A great question, and it was a challenge. So for us, and 12,000, yes, I think from last year is one of our lower years of applicants. And we certainly, as you say, seeing 18,000 already, and the year is not finished. and I anticipate that will probably end up in sort of 20 something or other. But the process still remains the same. How do you get a huge volume of individuals fairly effectively, efficiently recruited through a process that also actually imparts information to the candidate, whether they're successful or not. So there's so much to think about when you're trying to build this process. And I think the first place you want to start is candidate experience. What is that candidate going to experience? And the second thing you need to consider is obviously, what are the right tools to enable you to make strong decisions? So you've got two sort of major pillars in your decision-making process there. So to cut a long story short, for us, there was a lot of exploring on the market in terms of what tools were available online at the time, because whilst we used to do a lot of telephone interviews in our early careers team, we wanted to find a way that was more efficient. We couldn't see as many candidates. There was 2 of us at the time, we couldn't see as many candidates as we wanted to. So, right, what can we do? What ways can we optimize this process? So we really started exploring online assessment tools for that first stage, that initial, first the candidate applies, they do some form of online assessment, which helps us identify those that we want to take through to the next steps. And then following that, it's really about what can you do to bring more information to the candidate in their journey while simultaneously assessing them. So following online steps, we then inbuilt assessment centers where we can meet candidates en masse, still trying to deliver a personalized experience. And concurrently, we also developed a talent spotter process. So essentially recruiting 243 young people into a business in early careers programs. We realized that there was inefficiencies in doing one-on-one hiring. So what we did was we created a club of trained individuals from the business, talent spotters, to enable us to be able to actually start running assessment centers on a much larger scale and making decisions much more quickly, and then getting to that final decision, which is what the candidates want. So yes, effective and efficient decision and candidate experience.
Nice. Well, and if you look at now in hindsight, and if you had to highlight the most important factors that help shortlist candidates without losing quality and ensuring diversity, what would you highlight?
Really is that initial stage is finding which is the online assessment. And I think for most kind of large scale early careers programs, we're all using some form of online assessment at that initial part of the recruitment process. So for us, it was about finding a tool that enabled us to identify talent for L'Oreal. So being able to adapt that tool in some way to the skills that we're looking for, our sort of dimensions of potential, and be able to do that in a way that is not overly intimidating to the candidate. We're really aware that sort of different parts of society, different individuals might find things more stressful than others. So we were trying to find something that was accessible, sort of interesting to do, gave candidates some feedback afterwards, and then we were able to adapt to our own competencies that we're looking for.
Yeah, nice. Then if we then look now back, because I mean, we're looking here over a period of time, and we look to this number, the next number of the 87.5 hours, I think, that you saved in this process, which is like a huge number, particularly when you said in your introduction that you were with 2 full-time recruiters at the time, having this massive interest of young people joining you. Could you share with us shortly how you allocated these hours internally? And how was it also perceived internally when you look at this number?
Absolutely. So, well, for us, talking about perception, I think when we were moving to, particularly then utilizing Pera for one of our assessment tools, of course, we had to produce a fairly good business case internally to demonstrate the benefit that it would bring to the process, because in terms of the technology used, the AI approach, it was very different from what we'd used before. So we had to come with a strong argument. And actually, this was one of the pivotal moments that we realized the impact it was going to have. And actually, if I think back to, so once we were able to implement Pera as a digital assessment and prove they were able to save around 875 hours a year, this was significant because not only is it supporting the making decisions quickly and effectively because we're able to reinvest those hours in another part of the process, but also it actually meets the candidate experience expectation as well, because with those additional hours, you're able to, as I said, reinvest them in the process. And so we chose to reinvest them in not just the recruitment side actually, but in attraction, recruitment and development of early careers, because we had so much now additional available time. I'd have loved to have said we'd taken a holiday and then we came back and everything was done, but we didn't. It'd have been great. Yeah, we gave it back to them. We didn't take a holiday. So yes, I'll talk more on it later in more detail, but I think being able to really show the value that it would bring to, I think, us as recruiters, and being able to get rid of what we call kind of more parasite tasks and utilize this time to actually create something that's more individual and personalized to each candidate. We were able to start spending more time giving feedback, launch a shared inbox where we could get FAQs directly, we'd answer them ourselves, you know, all of this, and we'll come on to it later, but so there's so much opportunity. And from this also actually allowed us really to move the process a lot more faster. We were able to make decisions quicker. We were able to then bring candidates through the process in a much shorter time period, which then you're giving feedback and actually all then feeds back into a positive candidate experience.
Yeah, which is something that is, I think if we looked at the data again on Indeed, I think it mentions in general that candidates, I think their biggest frustration usually is that it is not a personal process, that it takes very long and that they receive no feedback, or if there's any feedback, that it's very standard, right? Thank you for applying and we'll keep you in our database. And I think by reinventing this recruitment process and doing it in the way you did it, you actually also unwaste their time.
Yes, exactly.
Of course, efficiency is often heard of as the easiest in between brackets, right? To kind of create a business case, which you also mentioned in the beginning. But maybe even more important is quality of hires, right? And diversity of hires, because that brings progress to L'Oreal as a company. Also, you are transitioning to a beauty tech company yourself, which needs different competencies and skills than maybe 10 years ago. Now here is a very interesting stat. We see here on the screen, right? 73.5% of hired grads are classified as key players in the business. Now, first of all, Alex, what is a key player for all of us around here?
Great question. So for us, a key player essentially falls under three different definitions. We have someone who would be categorized as a future leader. So a high performer, a strong leader, someone that can take a key position in the business in the coming years. We have a rising player. So someone who is certainly a promising employee, someone who shows that potential to continue to move upwards and take the next step. And then an essential player. So a highly skilled employee who is able to move laterally or expand their scope. So those kind of three, so the future leader, rising player, and essential player are all what makes up someone who would be defined as a key player.
Got it. And then what I find very groundbreaking, and we've been working with a lot of companies around the globe, is that you're one of the first to actually measure post-hiring success. So you track it. Usually you even see that data exists in different systems, right? You have tracking systems, you have HR systems. What does this number actually tell us, that it's 73.5%?
So, I mean, this was a really great demonstration of the success of our grad scheme. So what I should probably clarify at this point is, as you saw, we hired 243 early careers individuals into our different program in 2022. but those are predominantly in internships, apprenticeships, etc. About 35 of those would be grads. So our grad program is a little bit smaller than some of our industrial placement and summer internship programs. So our interns, apprentices, etc. pipeline into our grad program. Of course, we recruit externally as well. So of that pool of somewhere between 28 to 35 grads, depending on what year it is between 2011 and 2019 that you could see here. We've tracked their performance over time, and we can now see that of those that have remained in the business from the graduate program, and we sometimes call that our management trainee scheme, so I'll use those phrases interchangeably, so just making that clear. Of those individuals, 73.5% of them are now identified as key players, and that's roughly 2 times the average population, so the general population that was recruited within that time, individuals that weren't on the grad scheme. So we can really see here that not only is our grad scheme and the program itself built in a way that is really developing individuals to become strong performers, but we're also identifying the right individuals to be on that program as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and that it's 2x better, right, than the general population tells something about the quality of hires that you did over time, which takes time, of course, to kind of
exactly
you know, show in data. But
yeah,
it's something that is super important, and I think one of the big tips also to from your side to actually bring that back to recruitment, right, and share that with recruiters. From doing, I mean, another interesting indicator for quality is usually retention, right? If we look at an objective measure, which is also something that you've been covering over the past year. So we see that 45% of graduate hires are still in the business. We do see a lot of companies struggling with this, and you seem to have found your sweet spot. Are there other good insights beyond, let's say, the fact that you use tools to get insights about quality of applicants? What are other elements that promote this trend?
So that's actually a great question, and it's something that we certainly have had to really tackle over the last years. And whilst 45% is a really great stat, particularly as it's 2011 to 2019. 2011 incidentally is the year I started at L'Oreal, which is now becoming slightly terrifying. So I'm having a really sort of strange moment.
Your medal, you get your medal.
Yeah. So yeah, it's taken some test and learn for sure. We haven't got it right every time each year. So for us, I think we have an 18-month graduate program, and on that program, these individuals are moved every 6 months between different rotations, so they get to explore different functions, different divisions, different brands, and really kind of expand their skill set. And it's a very intense 18 months for them. So one of the things that we've initially had to focus on is actually after that program, and we send them off into the wide world of the business, how do we still maintain their level of engagement? Because suddenly they've been focused on for 18 months, they've got to move every 6 months, and then they're in a role potentially for 2 years. So what do we do to make sure that they still feel supported, invested in, etc.? So I think for us, one of the key things that we focused on is that actually those first 2 or 3 years after the program, making sure they still have the right learning tracks. Our learning and development team have fantastically created some wonderful modules for them to follow. It becomes a lot more optional at that point as well. We have to rely on their own judgment and sort of, driving their own learning. We've also become a lot more focused on what we call borderless talent. So I think in years gone by, if you were interested in international career, typically you might have expected to work for 4, 5, 6 years before you might be moved elsewhere into another country. That's not the case for us. We're very invested in giving our employees in sort of earlier stages of their career more opportunity to grow and learn and kind of develop that open-minded mindset. And so through sort of things like this, there isn't, there's no silver bullet, there's no absolute one solution. I think there's lots of these touch points that you can build in to make sure that you are maintaining this talent after the program. And I find it's that drop-off period between sort of 1 to 3 years after the program where it can be higher risk because they've had this like intense focus, and suddenly it's not so much. So that's where we've really focused our energies in retention for the grads.
Yeah, that's also interesting that it's not only the recruitment part, but you also touch upon this development and learning, that it clicks together, and that you have to initiate different initiatives to actually make this number. It's not one thing, but it's bringing actually a cross-functional, also internally, a cross-functional group together to build this program.
Absolutely.
We're moving quickly from efficiency to quality to something that is close to your heart and L'Oréal's heart, which is providing every talent around the globe a fair chance to actually get to meet you, and to identify, the talents and the competencies and the potential that they have. We see here that you covered 54 universities. I know that there are a few more in the UK, but this is a very impressive number. Why is this number important to you?
For me, and whilst we can talk about lots of different diversity metrics, for me, this is a really great one because it demonstrates our commitment to trying to break down barriers, trying to stop individuals thinking, oh, it's, L'Oréal, they've got lots of assessments and assessment centres, and that's probably not for me, or big corporates aren't for me. We want to really break down these barriers, and very much under the ethos of talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. So we're not completely focused on 5 key universities or 10 key universities. We really want the opportunity for people to interact with us from all over the UK, no matter what they're studying, where they're studying it. So, and again, it comes back to being, we're a small team. I think people expect the early careers recruitment team to be sort of 10s, 20s of people. It's at some point 2, now it's 3 of us. And so in terms of getting out and about on campus and actually meeting people to encourage them to see us, as an employer of choice and be excited by opportunities with us, it's challenging, being physically present, and absolutely we're building into our campus strategy different ways that employees in the business can support us, so we really can be on campus as much as possible. But the fact that we now have at least 54 universities represented in our shortlist, so that's not even a long list of where everyone's coming from, is a really great demonstration that we are absolutely trying to be there for everyone, no matter where they're studying, what they're studying.
Yeah, it's interesting. You touch upon something that reminds me of the previous webinar when we were with ISE, where we talked about the importance of giving every candidate a fair chance to be recognized for their talent and potential, particularly because at that time, the expert pointed out that in times where there's economic downturn, the less privileged students actually feel barriers to apply for large corporates. And that's what you actually would like to avoid. How do you deal with these types of trends?
Yeah, really great question. So I'd say it's something that we're not only focusing on during a sort of an economic downturn. It is something that we have been very conscious of pre, post, during. And one of the fantastic things actually about using Pera digital assessment was we were able to then have faith in the decisions that were being made, that we were able to introduce a CV-less process. So we were able to advertise to students that when they apply, they're doing our online test and they come to assessment center, but actually we're not looking at their CV. So that's just another example of how we're trying to sort of reduce these barriers, or at least self-perceived barriers to application, by making it as open as possible, and really trying to create a process that isn't intimidating. We talk in the language that we even use when we talk about the assessment tools, etc., and is talking about sort of quick and accessible and things like that, to try and really encourage people. So it's not so much about sort of predicting these trends and trying to tackle them as and when they come. I think it's just more of a state of play the whole time for us. And I was really proud when we were able to launch the CV-less process, because I felt that was such an important element of really kind of putting our money where our mouth was in terms of when walking the walk. with regards to accessibility, particularly when we talk about lower socioeconomic or less privileged students, etc. We were able to really commit to that.
Interesting. And when you talk about this, right, a CV-less process, did you have to convince people internally about
yes
it? Because of course everyone has been used to something for the, you know, there's this saying, right, old habits die hard. How did you overcome that?
It was a really interesting one, because obviously there are so many, I think particularly, change is hard. And we were lucky that we were already in in this method that I was calling Talent Spotter, where we weren't using intern hiring managers or graduate hiring managers to identify those that would join their team. We were training individuals to spot talent for the group, you know, functionally, yes, but for the group. And so actually we were able to target those individuals first to really train them up on the benefits of this process, because there are so many. And so I think once you were able to clarify clearly what those benefits are, and it's quite logical, you were then able to really get people on board. But certainly there was change. We had to kind of go through the steps of kind of almost consulting with the sort of wider recruitment team and HR, and really doing our research to make sure that we were fully tooled up when we wanted to go to the business and say, okay, when you come to an assessment center, you're not going to see a CV. And for us, that was critical to, you know, preventing, and, you know, the list, like I said, is fantastic in terms of the benefits it brings. It prevents that sort of unconscious bias creeping in when we look at a CV and make an initial judgment. It gives an opportunity for a candidate to kind of really speak to their abilities in their more sort of fluently and articulately in the way that they describe themselves, focus on what they really want to focus on. So yes, it took some steps to go through, and yes, there was some hesitance and a bit of resilience at times, but I think very quickly people were able to understand the benefit of it, particularly in a more talent spotter environment where you're not doing one-for-one recruitment.
Thanks. Well, it's good to know. I think there are some questions from the audience coming in. One question, Alex, that is coming in says, Rosie asks, has becoming a CV-less process, has it make the shortlisting process also easier or actually more difficult?
So yes and no, and yes and no is the short answer. So shortlisting sometimes can be faster because you are not reading through lots of CVs to make a decision. You are using the online assessment tools that you've integrated, and that's why it's important to invest in one that is that you can trust, and that you feel is giving you relevant information as well to make your decisions. So in that way, you can start making decisions quite quickly. No, in that when we first integrated new assessment tools, what we hadn't anticipated for us, and this is just a kind of a specific example of where it didn't work straight away, you know, there's always that test and learn period. We forgot that actually quite a lot of candidates will apply to more than one role. They might apply to 10 or 15. And so when you have that happening and you are shortlisting quickly, and then you acknowledge that through your ATS, you can see a candidate's applied to 10 different roles, that's when you can start, things can get a bit more complicated because you don't have that CV to enable you to maybe help them you know, guide their decision and which could be a more applicable role for them. And again, this is more specifically intern and graduate level. We're not really talking experienced hire at this point. So we then had to think about what ways can we make this easier for candidates and us as recruiters. So one thing that we did, we started implementing a maximum of 3 roles that any candidate can apply to sort of within a rolling period. So that enabled us then to not come up against that challenge. But in general, yes, it really does help shortlisting, as long as you've integrated the right tools that you trust and feel give you the right information.
Yeah.
Shall I jump on to the next question as well, Rina?
Yeah, go ahead. So I think there's a question, on what kind of questions or tests does the online assessment involve? What activities are included during assessment days?
Absolutely. So in terms of questions and tests, so we have two online assessments before our recruiters will screen. The first is the Pera digital interview, where we ask candidates 3 competency-based questions. And again, we try and keep it going back to making things kind of accessible, nothing too scary, very easy things that they could talk about from, work, university experience. They don't have to have had a job, an internship before. So things like, tell us about a time when you've worked as part of a team, what was your role? And so the candidates then have to do a written response. And then our second online tool is the Pera cognitive test, which is, I think you might be more familiar with this cognitive test, and enables us to assess the sort of verbal, numerical, memory competencies or capabilities of the candidate as well. So with then these 2 scores that we receive from each test, we are then able to make a shortlisting decision. What activities are including during assessment days? So that's actually a very good question, because we've had to adapt, as we all have over the COVID period, going virtual, etc. So at the moment, we are doing, it's a 2-step process, because everything is still online, but actually we will be transitioning to a optional either online or in-person model at the start of the next recruitment cycle in September. But for now, candidates do a case study, which they get given in advance to prepare. They come to the virtual assessment. And of course, we actually, in the build up to the assessment for the candidates, we do give them a briefing as well to make sure that they kind of all start on a bit of a level playing field with regards to knowledge of L'Oréal and what we do. So that when they go into this case study, they are kind of a little bit more prepared. They present their case study to some of our talent spotters, and then they will also have a virtual interview as well. When we move back into the physical version next year, we'll also be adding a group exercise element.
Yeah, nice. I also see another question from Michiel. He's asking, diversity needs inclusion to not only attract the right talent, but also commit the right talent for as long as possible. Wondering if and what role the assessment has during the recruitment process regarding inclusion.
Very good question. So, best way to start. So for us, when it comes to inclusion, we are, as I think we all are, very conscious of this right from the very beginning. So when it comes to the recruitment process, the assessment tool that we've built was built keeping this in mind. So particularly with the digital interview that we use with Pera, when feeding the AI the information to build, and this is where I really need to come in and say really clever and wonderful things about it, because whilst I was certainly supportive in the process, I am not the wizard here on all things Pera. But so when we are kind of feeding the information into the AI to help us develop the right template to identify talent, we want to make sure that that is coming from every different sort of diversity metric, inclusion metrics of all walks of life, all parts of society, etc., so that we really have a holistic view. And we can be as inclusive as possible throughout that process. So we're not creating sort of cookie cutter recruitment here. This is really creating something that is including of all working styles. So if you think about neurodiversity, all functions, all socioeconomic, ethnicity, etc. So we really want to make sure that the tool that we are using mirrors everything in that process, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe to add to that, I think what we're basically doing is blind auditions, and we make it purely about competencies that drive change and impact in L'Oréal's organization. And that's what the digital interview identifies, which makes it actually, and that's something, again, that we have to back up with data, right? If we look at ethnicity, if we look at gender, if we look at university, or top university versus less ranked universities, it starts with actually showcasing that everyone gets a fair opportunity, and that even if we track down the line those candidates that were hired in the organization and that may come from less diverse backgrounds, as we would put it, also do a great job. And then the inclusion part starts with the internal organization of L'Oréal. Are we open? Are we open to receive talents from all around the globe, from different kinds of backgrounds, different universities? And that's I think the journey that we've been on together for the past 6 years. And that always takes time, but now we can see by the data that it actually is working.
Actually, from the inclusion perspective as well, it can come down to just really small things in terms of representation in imagery. We're conscious of, as you might imagine, being sort of a beauty company in the cosmetics industry. Typically, women are much more interested in working at L'Oréal than men. And one thing that we kind of acknowledged a few years ago now is actually a lot of our recruitment material was actually quite female heavy, because a lot of our brands are very female heavy. So we were taking images from our brands and from our kind of different makeup lines and putting them on our lovely recruitment kind of material. And we think it looks lovely and wonderful, but actually it's not as inclusive just from, and if you talk very simplistically, it's not as inclusive from a male perspective. Absolutely, there'll be men out there that are very familiar with the cosmetics and makeup, etc., but there are a large percentage that aren't. So if you then extrapolate that out to other aspects, then you can see actually how you can really kind of get into the detail in everything. So not only do you have to be conscious of inclusion internally, and once someone lands, making sure that they feel included, within their team in terms of our ERGs that we have available for people to join, but actually right from the very beginning in terms of the wording you're using in your recruitment process, the images you're showing, all of that adds up to building something that is inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely. There's still some other questions, but let's move on.
Okay.
and then we'll, if there's time left, we'll dive into
there's some amazing questions.
This one, do you want to touch upon it now, or you?
No, we can as you say, we'll keep going. And
okay, we keep going, and then we'll touch upon them. Now, we went through the stats from efficiency to quality of hires, to diversity and inclusion. Now we have a lot of recruiters with us that are, experiencing challenges that you may and your team may have experienced as well. What are the biggest tips and tricks that you like to leave us with, or leave the audience with, if you look at early on campus recruitment?
As you can see on the screen here, so the first is invest in an efficient but reliable process. And not only is this beneficial for you as a recruiter, to make sure that you are optimizing your time as best you can, but it is critical for the candidate experience as well. And here are some of my tips with regards to that specifically. So tips about making peace with the fact that there will always be some dissatisfaction in volume hiring. This I found really challenging in the early days of my career within early careers, is that I wanted everything. And one of the reasons I love early careers is because of this kind of cyclical nature of the program. You attract, recruit, development, you do a year, and you can really quickly see the impact that you've had, where you can improve, etc. But I had to get used to the fact that with some years up to sort of 28,000 or 32,000 applications, you can't be perfect all the time, but it's about acknowledging where you can and where you can identify those opportunities to have a big impact. So looking at what needs to be sorted with regards to your recruitment process and identifying, okay, I've got these 10 things that I need to do, which is going to have the most impact to the most people, and let's work from there. Don't get me wrong, I still get a stabbing pain in my heart when I see that a candidate has been missed. That an email went into their junk mail and they didn't see it, and but that you have to make peace with that fact. do not compromise on quality for the decision making. I think that's evident in the stat we showed earlier about the sort of 73.5% of our grads now sit at a key player level. Your early careers programs are essentially what are fueling your business, and they are the individuals, the talent that are going to be hopefully leading that business one day. So you want to make sure that you are making a quality decision, and sometimes that can be, you have to push boundaries as well. That person might be not what management might have been expecting on the grad scheme. So you have to stand behind your decisions and being able to utilize. And this is one of the reasons why we have so many, candidates might say we have so many steps in an early careers process, more than you might think for an experienced hire. But actually, we want to get as much information and data about these individuals as possible through our first online assessment, then our second, and then having maybe 2 or 3 steps at assessment center, so that we can build this really coherent picture of an individual to be able to make these quality decisions. Yeah. And then finally, when the initial screening phase is low touch, you can free up a lot of time. And this is one of my favorite parts, because it really kind of revolutionized how we were able to operate with being such a small team, is that if you can automate part of your systems, and I love technology for this with regards to the volume recruitment process, you can find a lot of time back, and you can reinvest this in the candidate experience or the attraction process. So you can, not only can you reach more people, but you can make that process better for candidates. So candidate experience before and after hiring. So this is something that is fundamental to, and you have seen the thread throughout this discussion of the impact it's had, in that you can find yourself in a place where you can really, for want of a sort of better term, level up your offering, not only through the program, the recruitment and the attraction, but actually the whole candidate journey. So I broke this down into 3 parts, and these are just examples. There is so much more, but I could have filled a whole 1 hour discussion on what we changed once we could get these 875 hours back. So some examples of things that we did differently with regards to the attraction once we moved on to this process was creating some online workshops. So we talked about actually accessibility of our and being on campus. So yes, it's great that we can be on campus and be on more campuses and be physically present for some students. That's not going to be for everyone. So we want to have online workshops where not only are we virtually available for those that can't get to us, but also we are upskilling them as well to help them in their applications, not just for L'Oreal, but actually in general. We could do more campus actions. We could build a social media strategy. We were sort of, at the time, we were fairly light touch on social media. We've certainly invested a lot more in that, because building content, creating assets takes time. We're recruiters, not marketers, so we upskilling ourselves in that as well. Advocacy campaigns, all sorts. Recruitment, so this was where you could really suddenly see a significant impact from a candidate experience perspective. We were able to launch sort of dedicated shared inbox where which we could then have on every job ad on our careers website, saying, candidates, if you come across an issue and you want to talk to us directly, this is the email address. We could have that sort of fully manned all the time. We were able to actually hold more regular assessment centers. So again, all speaking to getting the process moving a lot faster, so you can get to decisions. So whether a candidate is successful or not, they still get a decision faster, which is typically what they appreciate. And finally, from a development perspective, in terms of development of the program itself, being able to liaise a lot more heavily with our learning and development team to create more kind of personalised offerings for the grad program, our internships, summer internships, and invest a lot more heavily on the onboarding experience. So, for example, we had, I remember in the first year, we were even sort of writing good luck in your exam cards to also 200 interns and grads that we'd recruited thus far for that year. And whilst that seems like a lot to do, there's a lot of signing names, but actually the response that we got back from that was phenomenal. So just these little things that you can reinvest in.
Yeah, super personal, right?
And very personal, yeah.
Personal approach. One thing, because I wrote down what you just said, we are recruiters, not marketeers.
Yeah.
Which boils down to something new. You've been in this profession for a while. How has it changed over time? It sounds like you have to now be recruiter, occupational psychologist, a data scientist, and a marketeer in one. Is that true? Has it changed over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I say that, I'm talking from a time pre being able to reinvest this time, and that, you know, that was 6-7 years ago, where I'd say that we probably were more simplistic in our view of an early careers recruiter, in that you were a recruiter and that was your skill set. And now, and particularly, I mean, if you look at my career path, you can see for the last couple of years, I've actually specialized in employer branding, and I've only recently come back to the early careers piece as well. So employer branding is marketing for recruiters, and the kind of value that that brings to a company, employer branding in general, again, that could be a whole separate discussion, but you're totally right. We are now in a position where we aren't just recruiters anymore. We are marketeers. We are heavily invested in employer branding and getting the right messages out to our candidates, to students, to potential experienced hires. We are meant to be psychologists, but we're not, whilst we have been able to upskill ourselves from a marketing perspective, and at least that's something that I've been very passionate about in my career, we are not trained psychologists and psychometricians, which is a fantastic word. So we need help, and that's where we work with companies like Pera, who are the professionals, to help us in these elements. So yes, I think it's a bit of that recognition of, okay, identify your strengths as well, but also understand where your development areas are and find the right people that can support you in that.
Yeah, nice. Out of the box.
Yes, out of the box strategies to attract diverse talent. This is something that we are really, you can see from our discussion throughout this hour or 46 minutes, that this is critical to us, and it's something that we've been investing in for a very long time and thinking about, but the journey is certainly not over, and this is something that we will continue to invest in. So one of the easiest and most trackable metrics that we have, so I often use this as an example, and actually because it's quite different from a lot of other industries, is that we do have to work quite hard to sort of encourage sort of male identifying individuals to apply to L'Oreal, because it's not their, for a lot of them, it's not their kind of initial first thought. They don't sort of wake up in the morning and think, do you know what I want to do in life? I want to work in beauty. So we have to find ways, and I say, like, it's a simplistic version, but this is just an example. We have to find ways to be able to tackle this. So we've sort of over the years sort of all thought of all sorts of things. So we actually need to recruit more male identifying individuals, when actually a lot of other companies are looking to recruit more women. So we've actually we've partnered with lots of different companies over the years to in campus activities, recruitment drives, who we could sort of balance each other and actually give each other the opportunity to draw from a more diverse talent pool, because you are both bringing a sort of over-indexed in one version or another. So, we can work together on that. So running campus activities that are not commonly explored, we've started really, I say started again, for quite a few years now, really investing actually in more of this upskilling piece. So instead of going onto campus and saying, hi, we're L'Oreal, this is what we have to offer, we are going and we're running CV workshops, we're running Smash Your Assessment Center kind of briefs, something that is, and absolutely, don't get me wrong, we might do a little bit of a L'Oreal push at some point during that discussion, but actually it's something that people would be wanting to come to, whether they're interested in L'Oreal or not, because those students want to be upskilled in those areas. We also then look at sponsor. So again, going back to the sort of gender balance concept, we have been sponsoring rugby clubs, also I should say men's rugby clubs, and other societies like that. We work very closely with a lot of ACS in different universities. So we are really trying to just find different ways that aren't so traditional. Go to a careers fair, do a campus presentation, and then see the applications come in. We really want to kind of diversify what we're doing on campus. And then adjust branding, language, topics, and case studies to be fully gender neutral and actually everything neutral. So And I mentioned that briefly, so I won't go into it too much, but actually just thinking about every touch point for any candidate, whether that is in your employer branding, in your marketing, or whether that's in your recruitment process, thinking about what language are you using, what imagery are you putting out there, and what is it saying about your company, either consciously or subconsciously. And that's a tough one. And you have to really think about your own biases as well. And I've really got into the habits internally when I'm, because I still am looking after employer branding, is when I'm building copy or assets to go out externally, I will sort of double check them with different individuals in the business to see if anything gets flagged. So yes, those are
tips. Those are important things to actually leverage your internal diverse organization to kind of check back, right? Are we at every touch point at least doing our best to take an unconscious diverse approach? Thank you for those tips. I think we can, continue to really dive deep on all these different topics. However, we're moving to the last bits and pieces, because we have tips, but there's also probably, areas of challenges or things where you would identify saying, well, these are things that I would like to improve on or be aware of, that I like to tackle even more further. And we see 3 of them. I think you highlighted on the screen, Alex. Can you take us through them?
Yeah. So yes, current focus for us is this continuous solid decision making. I talked about how critical that is, and as I think basically you can't stand still on this. Companies change. Our we've had adaptations in our sort of internal vocabulary that we use for competencies, strengths, potential, etc. So we just want to make sure that the assessments we're using, the way that we're reviewing candidates, etc., is always matching that. So it's not. I think it's not a matter of just saying, okay, I've created this wonderful process, off we go. It keeps changing. We've seen how, even as simply as, COVID lockdown, we're all going virtual. We've had to change, but how do we make sure that we're making still solid decisions in a completely virtual environment? Keeping on your toes in that regard, I think, is key. Then we have DE&I and data gathering. This is such a challenge for us. We are really, and you mentioned, Rena, earlier about this kind of move that L'Oreal's undergone from being this sort of known for marketing and of course beauty, to this more idea that we are a beauty tech company, and within that has gone a huge sort of revelation and renovation in terms of the way that we handle data internally and the way that we can then utilize that. So we are at the beginning of that journey. Let's say there's lots more to do, and we just felt so conscious that if you can have the data, if you can have this information, it can help you make stronger decisions. You can spot your development areas, you can spot where you can improve. So just trying to finesse your data gathering capabilities can be so critical, particularly from a DE&I perspective. And then disconnected generations. This is just such an interesting one that we're seeing now, particularly coming back into a sort of more hybrid world, where you have, for the first time, you have sort of millennial generations managing Gen Z, particularly Gen Z that were kind of predominantly educated through a virtual COVID period. So we can see a clash there. And so we are really investing heavily in terms of our time and working with the learning and development team to create some great materials, some great trainings to enable these 2 generations to sort of communicate effectively, understand each other, to really kind of oil the mechanics of that relationship.
Yeah, interesting. I'd like to touch upon 2 of them. So I think there was a recent research that was pointing out that Generation Z is looking for companies that put impact and ethical standards first, much more than previous generations, but that they're still lacking some interpersonal skills, which of course COVID-19 didn't really help, right? Because there was less interaction to be done. And at the beginning, you had to onboard them even digitally instead of physically in an office. Yeah. Are there specific examples where you're working, because it takes 2 to tango, right? It's different generations. Could you mention one initiative where you're trying to build those bridges or to overcome these challenges?
Yes. So I think there's sort of 2 parts to that. One is this, as you say, there was certainly, and there are reports and studies showing this, that the students that were sort of growing up in their higher education during, or actually education in general during that COVID-19 period, didn't have the exposure to develop some of these skill sets. And don't get me wrong, many were able to develop them anyway, and that's fantastic. But we have to acknowledge that not everyone is starting from the same kind of starting block at this point when it comes to having had exposure to work physically in a group environment, so they can learn these sort of interpersonal skills and communication skills. So we adapted the onboarding and not onboarding, more the when an internal grad joins us, we have a sort of a learning program in those first few weeks, which actually is very focused on adapting to a corporate environment. And one of the things that we had to really sort of level up was the more sort of interpersonal skills, communication skills, even presentation skills. We saw some fantastic presenters during our assessment process, but actually they've learned to present like this, and they can have a script and they can read from their script. So they were brilliantly prepared, but then when they had to be in front of a room of people and present, it wasn't comfortable for them. So we had to really focus on, okay, what are we missing in terms of making sure that everyone is kind of starting from the same place here. So we had to really sort of adapt our learning programs as a result of that. And then second was actually, as you say, that just this disconnect piece again. And it was just basically tackling it from both ends of the scale, working with millennial managers independently to talk about what to expect. This is Gen Z, this is what they've gone through, this is how they view the world, so that you can really just give them all the tools necessary to understand. And it worked both ways. This was also then sort of integrated into our learning program for the incoming interns and graduates as well, to say this is potentially going to be your manager, and this is what they might expect, and this is what they mean when they say this, so that at least there was a sort of joint understanding. Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like everyone's coming from the same place.
Okay, we're coming from the same level. Yeah, interesting. Well, it takes a lot of effort, though, right? An investment to do this. It's great to learn. I wanted to touch upon the first part about this continuous solid decision making. I think one of the key differentiating factors is that we are able, also with new technology, to not work with, let's say, static assessments, but actually with dynamic assessments, meaning that the learnings that we take from people that actually joined L'Oréal, we can feed back to the models to actually continuously learn what great looks like within the organization. And that is, I think, a really different approach than, let's say, a normal assessment, a more static assessment that is out there. So to continuously solidly and adjust the decision making, because again, great today is not great tomorrow. Looking at the time, I'm trying to round off. Before I do that, because I like to ask the audience, of course, about what you like to learn in the next webinar. Let me pick out two more questions for you, Alex. I think one question which dives in a little bit to the fact of traveling, right, for student assessment centers when you start them in person again next year. Will you look to cover student travel costs from an EDI perspective?
Rosie, it's like you're in the building with me. This is currently a conversation I'm having. So yes, it's certainly, so I came back into this role in the UK in January, and we're building out this new assessment process. And one of the elements that I want to build into that is, of course, budget for student travel costs. Because as you say, from an EDI perspective, it's quite critical. So I'm just kind of working through the budget at the moment, trying to sort that out. And yeah, absolutely. And failing that, we will have the virtual option as well. But yes, that is certainly part of the plan.
Nice. Moving to the last bit, because we're rounding off. Maybe the audience can leave, of course, ideas about the next topic for the next webinar. Again, we do these sharing sessions on a regular basis, almost every month. So you can vote for your next webinar topic. AI for unbiased recruiting, myths or truths or untruths. Two, of course, you've all been hearing and maybe also testing ChatGPT, using ChatGPT in recruitment, very interesting topic as well. Or is candidate screening human-led or tech-led? I think we're not allowed to vote, Alex.
I know, I just tried. I was like, ooh, I want all of them.
Which one would you choose?
I'm really fascinated by ChatGPT at the moment. Yeah, every article about how it relates to recruitment, I'm kind of reading up on. So that's where my vote was going.
Well, without influencing everyone around the table too much, sorry for that. Yes, everyone voted. Yes, almost. Thank you. Then I'd like to thank everyone. Oh, wow. Now, there you go. 73% is on ChatGPT. So guys, that will be the next topic. Lovely. Thank you. Hey, Alex, thanks so much for your time, for sharing your experiences. There's lots of topics. We are recruiters, not marketeers. I wrote down, that you have time to invest, CV less process. You've taken us through everything over the past hour. There might be many more questions, but we'll take them offline, and see you on the next one. Thank you, guys.
No worries. Thank you so much. And if you have questions, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.